The formula for testosterone, C19H28O2, and estradiol, C18H24O2, is very similar. What makes them so different chemically?
Well, you should know as an organic. No, they're not the same. Those are formula, and they're not the structure. Okay, and you can tell me just by looking at those formula what's different about them.
The structure.
No, but how many hydrogens do they have?
28 versus 24.
What does that tell you?
There's different bonding.
But they have different unsaturations, right? So one is much more unsaturated than the other. And if I recall correctly, I can actually write this. All right, so I don't know if I'm going over time here. So chemists know the structures of things. But which one is which? So I believe that's estradiol. Okay, so estradiol has an aromatic ring in it. Okay, and two OH groups, and testosterone. Okay, I don't have all the stereochemistry drawn in here. These are called steroids in general, and I think this comes out like that. Okay, and testosterone has that structure. Okay, so I would say formula. A lot of compounds have similar formula, okay, but the structure of these is quite different, not radically different, but quite different in that this part of this molecule is completely planar and has an OH group, which is a completely different functional group. This has a ketone and not as much unsaturation. So in this area, they're very different, and small, what looks on paper to be very small structural differences could lead to very different binding capabilities.
How can testosterone be converted to estradiol? Does the conversion work in both directions?
Yes. The conversion works in both directions. The way it's converted that I know of, simply because I have breast cancer, and they treat breast cancer with things that are called aromatase inhibitors, is there's an enzyme called aromatase that works in both directions. And think about the name, aromatase. That means it makes it aromatic. And what happens is so estradiol, I'm pretty sure is converted into testosterone with aromatase. So it's an enzymatically promoted process, and anything that's enzymatic is a two-way process.
It seems like the chemistry and biology here are very interrelated. Testosterone and estradiol circulate in the bloodstream, some unbound, which can enter a cell and activate receptors. How are they able to bind to and interact with a cell? Is that based on their structure, how they bind differently?
I assume so. All right, so what I would say is I don't know the specific binding of testosterone versus, I probably know more about estradiol than I know about testosterone being a girl. I'm just joking. We all have testosterone too.
Yeah.
Okay. And testosterone has like a lot of different binding sites. In fact, some cancers are regulated with testosterone, such as lymphomas, and so some cancer cells, I'm talking about something very specific here, but some cancers such as prostate cancer or and some lymphomas, the cancer cells themselves have specific binding sites for testosterone. And a lot of people think there's some interplay between the different hormones, but in breast cancer, it's more about estradiol. So you actually take these drugs called aromatase inhibitors that prevent testosterone from converting into estradiol, because most breast cancers are estradiol sensitive, or a lot of them are. So anyway, how it gets into the cell, I'm assuming it gets into. Is that what you asked me? Terrible interview.
How they bind to and interact.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know specifically how they bind, but I know that this drug and probably this one too. I think they get in the cell through some kind of passive diffusion, and the binding sites I believe are in the DNA, or they're near the DNA. That's what my understanding of it is, and there are specific ER receptors there that kind of activate the DNA to do different things, like, for example, it gets your lining of your uterus ready to have babies. So you start proliferating cells inside the lining of your uterus. Or in cancer, breast cancer, it causes proliferation of the milk duct cells every time a woman goes through their cycle. So, I'm just laughing because I'm going all over the place here. But so one of the problems in breast cancer is sometimes the cancer is fed by this estrogen. So it gets into the cell, it kind of turns on the DNA, causes this proliferation, and it just doesn't stop. So I don't know the exact binding site or what the structure of it is, but I know it's a protein. So there's some kind of like little place in the protein where this fits right in. But these are significantly different enough that they might not have exactly the same binding site. To a chemist, those look really different.
How do you think chemistry influences gender and sexuality? Does it influence sexuality at all?
It has to. That's like a really big, broad question. So like so I don't know if you mean like chemistry in the laboratory, or you mean chemistry in your body. If you mean chemistry in your body, I would say absolutely. Like we are just a big collection of chemicals, and women have different proportions of these chemicals, if you want to focus on these two, than men do. You know.
What about sexuality versus gender? So how you,
What do you mean by sexuality?
like who you're attracted to?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It must. Like, I think it's all ultimately molecules.
Everything's molecules.
So I'm like a big believer that we're just molecules and we're just a collection of molecules. So I would assume, I mean, these drugs enter your brain. I would assume they affect different parts of your brain differently in the way. So I think it must affect sexuality. I'm not an expert on how it does. So.
All right, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.